This couple cried tears of gratitude when they realized how a fox returned the favor by saving their son. The story is a powerful reminder of the bond between humans and animals and how unexpected acts of kindness can come full circle. Many people cherish the chance to connect with nature, breathing in the fresh air, listening to the soothing sounds of the outdoors, and occasionally encountering wildlife. For our family, a holiday trip to the countryside became a life-changing experience that we could never have imagined. My wife and son had been asking for a getaway for months, so we finally rented a cozy cabin by the river. It was an ideal opportunity for relaxation, fishing, and family time. My son was especially excited. He had been begging for this trip, and I was glad to have time off work to make it happen. For me, the trip also brought back fond memories. My grandparents used to live near the area we were visiting, and the familiar smells of the forest and the river's calm flow were comforting. Sadly, they had to sell their house during a financial crisis and move to the city, where they lived with us until they passed. Revisiting this place brought a bittersweet feeling of nostalgia. We packed up our gear and necessities and hit the road early in the morning. Traffic delayed us, but we were glad to escape the city. The weather was perfect, and the car ride felt serene. My wife sat beside me in the passenger seat, enjoying the scenery while our son marveled at the sights from the back seat. The journey took us through endless forests and small, picturesque villages. We made a few planned stops to stretch our legs and take in the surroundings, but those stopovers ran longer than expected. By nightfall, we still had about 2 hours to go. The rain started pouring, and my son had fallen asleep in the back seat. Driving cautiously through the downpour, I was startled when my wife pointed out that our son had unbuckled his seatbelt while sleeping. I pulled over to fix it and decided to stretch my legs while I was at it. As I walked around the car, something in the muddy road caught my eye. It was the outline of an animal, lying motionless. I moved closer and realized it was a small fox. It seemed like the poor creature had been hit by a car. The rain was soaking me, but I couldn't ignore the fox. Its tiny frame looked fragile, and though it was breathing, it seemed barely alive. I crouched down, gently coaxing its eyes open, but they shut again almost immediately. My wife came over to see what was happening, and soon after, our son woke up and joined us. As he approached, the fox began to pant weakly, its labored breaths filling the silence. I told my son that there wasn't much we could do. The nearest veterinary clinic was far away, and we were in the middle of nowhere. But my son was adamant. "We can't leave it here," he said, his voice trembling. "What if we take it to the nearest village? Someone might know how to help." My wife offered a spare blanket from the car. I hesitated, unsure if we could make a difference, but my son's determination moved me. Wrapping the fox carefully in the blanket, we placed it in the back seat. My son stayed close, whispering words of encouragement to the tiny creature, while I drove toward the nearest village. The rain made the journey slower, but we eventually reached a small house with its lights still on. Knocking on the door, we were greeted by an older man who immediately offered to help. It turned out he had some experience treating injured animals and had basic supplies for emergencies. Together, we cleaned the fox's wounds and gave it water. The man assured us that the fox had a fighting chance if it was cared for properly. Over the next few days, we frequently checked in with the man to see how the fox was doing. Slowly but surely, it began to recover. When it was well enough, the man released it back into the forest, where it bounded away, disappearing into the trees. Our son was overjoyed, knowing that his insistence had saved its life. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal. But then something extraordinary happened. One sunny afternoon, while our son was playing by the river near our cabin, he slipped and fell into the water. The current was stronger than it looked, and he struggled to stay afloat. Panic gripped us as we rushed to help, but before we could reach him, a streak of orange darted toward the riverbank. It was the fox. The same fox we had rescued leaped into the water and swam toward our son. Nudging him toward the shore, It guided him to safety. Tears streamed down our faces as we watched this miraculous act of gratitude. Once our son was safe, the fox paused for a moment, as if acknowledging us, then disappeared back into the forest. That day, our family learned an unforgettable lesson about the interconnectedness of life and the importance of kindness. Saving the fox had seemed like a small act of compassion, but it became a life-saving moment for us in return. The bond we shared with that wild creature, however fleeting, left an indelible mark on our hearts. We carefully lifted the injured fox, wrapping it gently in a blanket, and placed it in the back seat of our car. Its fragile head rested on my son's lap, his small hands softly stroking its fur. The drive to the closest village was tense, the rain still pounding against the windshield, but we knew we had to act quickly. Navigating through the narrow roads, I drove as fast as the conditions allowed, determined to find help. When we reached the village, I stopped at the first house with lights on and asked for a veterinarian. A kind villager directed us to an older woman known for her experience with animals. "She's the closest thing we have to a vet," they said. Relieved to have a lead, I drove to her home and knocked on her door. The woman opened it cautiously, her face creased with age and wisdom. "Ma'am," I began, urgency in my voice, "we have an injured fox in the car. The villager said you're the only one who can help." She peered past me, her eyes softening as she saw the bundle in the back seat. "Bring it in," she said briskly, gesturing toward her cozy living room. Inside, the woman examined the fox with practiced hands, muttering observations under her breath. She opened a cabinet, pulling out an assortment of herbs, salts, and medicines we'd never seen before. "It has a fractured leg and likely a concussion," she announced after a thorough check. "You got here just in time. A little longer, and it wouldn't have made it." Relieved but still concerned, we watched as she began tending to the fox. Then she turned to me and said, "I need clean water from the well nearby. Take those buckets and leave them by the door when you return. Then go home and rest. Come back in a couple of days to check on the fox." Her confidence surprised us, but we trusted her. After fetching the water, we placed the buckets by her door as instructed and headed back to our cabin. My son, who had stayed close to the fox the entire time, reluctantly came with us. Exhausted from the ordeal, we all tried to settle down for the night. As my son drifted off to sleep, my wife and I sat on the balcony, the events of the day replaying in our minds. The image of the injured fox haunted us. Would it be okay? Could it recover? Our worries overshadowed the quiet beauty of the forest around us. The next day, all plans for relaxation or adventure fell by the wayside. The fox was all we could think about. My son kept asking when we could return to check on it, his concern evident in every word. We assured him we'd go back as soon as the woman said it was safe. 2 days later, at dawn, we woke our son early and enjoyed a quiet breakfast outside the cabin. By 7 a.m., we were on our way back to the old woman's house, anticipation and anxiety swirling in our hearts. Knocking on her door, we waited with bated breath. After a few moments, she opened the door, smiling warmly. "You're just on time," she said. Stepping aside, she revealed the fox sitting on a small cushion, its leg wrapped neatly in bandages. Though still weak, it looked much better, alert, its eyes bright and curious. My son's face lit up with joy as he knelt beside the fox, gently stroking its head. "Thank you," he whispered to the woman, his voice filled with gratitude. She nodded, her expression a mix of pride and tenderness. "The fox still needs rest," she explained, "but it's on the mend. You brought it here just in time, and now it has a good chance of recovery." We stayed for a while, watching the fox and talking with the woman. She shared stories of the many animals she had helped over the years, her deep respect for nature shining through every word. Before we left, she promised to keep caring for the fox until it was strong enough to return to the wild. As we walked back to our car, my son turned to me and said, "I'm glad we didn't leave it on the road. It feels good to help." His words filled me with pride and a sense of hope. This small act of compassion had not only saved a life but also taught our family a valuable lesson about kindness and responsibility. Driving back to the cabin, the forest seemed more vibrant, the air fresher. We felt a connection to the world around us that we hadn't experienced before. That little fox, with its resilience and will to survive, had left an indelible mark on our hearts. When the fox saw my son, its eyes lit up and its tail wagged energetically, much like a happy dog. My son approached, sat next to the fox, and gently patted its head, whispering softly to reassure it. The bond they had formed was undeniable, and the fox seemed comforted by his touch. The old woman watched them with a knowing look and said, "It will take time for the fox to fully heal. It cannot return to the wild until it is completely recovered. For now, it needs to be cared for indoors." Then she added something that surprised us. Looking at my son, she said, "This meeting was no accident. The fox and your son share a connection, a common destiny." My wife and I exchanged puzzled glances, but there was something about her tone that made her words linger in our minds. Before we left, she gave us detailed instructions on how to care for the fox and handed us a bag of herbs and medicine. I offered her money to show our gratitude, but she refused with a gentle smile. "Just visit whenever you can and keep in touch. That's all I ask," she said warmly. As we took the fox home, it quickly became part of our lives. My son named it Red because of its striking fur color. Though the name wasn't the most creative, it suited the fox perfectly. Red and my son became inseparable, spending every waking moment together. Red, however, had a fiery spirit. While it was gentle and affectionate with my son, it occasionally showed a bit of aggression toward my wife or me. We didn't mind. It was part of Red's personality, and we had grown to love it. Weeks turned into months, and Red thrived under our care. One day, we decided to take Red back to the old woman's village. It was our first visit with this new member of our family, and we were eager to show her how well Red had recovered. The moment we arrived, Red immediately recognized her and ran to her, tail wagging with excitement. The old woman greeted Red with open arms, stroking its fur as it snuggled against her. Then, as if understanding its place, Red joined my son in the yard, where they played together joyfully. Meanwhile, my wife and I helped the old woman prepare a meal in her cabin. As we worked, the sound of my son's laughter echoed from outside, a testament to the bond he shared with Red. Suddenly, a sharp yelp cut through the peaceful moment, followed by my son's startled cry. My heart dropped as I rushed outside, fearing the worst. What I saw froze me in place. Red had jumped on top of my son, sending him tumbling backward. At first, panic surged through me, and I yelled at the fox, thinking it had turned aggressive. But as I rushed forward, the scene before me became clear. Red lay weakly between my son and a lifeless snake. The snake, its fangs exposed, was unmistakably venomous. It had been mere moments away from striking. Red had saved my son. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt, leaving me overwhelmed with emotion. The fox, who had become a cherished part of our family, had acted on pure instinct to protect the boy it had grown to love. My son, unharmed but visibly shaken, knelt beside Red, tears streaming down his face. He gently stroked the fox's fur, whispering words of gratitude and sorrow. I crouched next to Red, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and heartbreak. I could see the life fading from its eyes. The venom had done its damage. Red's breaths grew shallower by the second, but its expression remained calm, almost serene. It was as if Red knew exactly what it had done and was at peace with the sacrifice. The old woman's words from weeks earlier echoed in my mind. "The fox and your son share a common destiny." At that moment, I understood her cryptic remark. By saving Red on that rainy night, we had unknowingly set the stage for it to save our son in return. Red passed away just moments later, its body still and its face almost showing gratitude. My wife and I stood helplessly as our son cried over the fox that had given its life for him. We all knelt by Red, overcome by grief but also by a deep sense of awe for its bravery. Despite the sorrow, we couldn't help but feel immense gratitude for the fox's ultimate sacrifice. We decided to bury Red near the cabin, a place it had come to love as much as we did. Together as a family, we dug a small grave under a towering tree and gently laid Red to rest. The old woman, who had come to check on us after hearing the commotion, helped us say our final goodbyes. She reminded us of the interconnectedness of all life and the profound bonds that sometimes form between humans and animals. Her words brought a small measure of comfort, framing Red's act as a beautiful part of the natural order. As we filled the grave, my son placed a small flower next to the mound, whispering a tearful goodbye to his friend and protector. My wife and I held each other tightly, feeling the weight of the moment but also an overwhelming sense of gratitude. We had lost Red, but we knew we owed him everything. Driving home from the cabin that evening, the memory of Red stayed heavy in the air. The forest outside the car window blurred as we reflected on the events of the day. None of us spoke much, but we didn't need to. The lesson Red had taught us was etched deeply into our hearts. It was a lesson about loyalty, love, and the sacrifices that can arise from the bonds we share. In the days that followed, Red's story became one we told often, a tale of courage and connection that would stay with us forever. Our son, though still grieving, found solace in the knowledge that Red had loved him enough to protect him, even at great cost. My wife and I took comfort in knowing that Red's legacy would live on in our family, a reminder of how life often works in mysterious but meaningful ways. Red's destiny had been to save our son, just as ours had been to save him on that rainy road. The circle was complete, and in the end, we had saved each other. Though the pain of losing Red was sharp, the gratitude for what he had done far outweighed the sorrow. Red had left us with a legacy of love and loyalty, one we would carry with us for the rest of our lives.